kind of realized that a lot of the work that I do with the tech CEOs and tech executives, are based maybe on 2-3 books. And one of the books is actually also your book. So in particular, like, when we discussed about pricing, and another one, which actually we just had a session like this morning with a tech CEO, is like, should I tell this to the investor in the first meeting or at the end of the presentation? And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the experiment that you did with putting the balsamico in the beer. And I kind of love it. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time and for us to deep dive a little bit more into the experiments that you've done.
Pleasure.
Maybe before we start, like what was the motivation for writing it?
So, as you know from some of my books, I was very, very badly burned. Right? Most of my body is covered with scar. This is why I have this funny half a beard. All of this is scar tissue, and I have much, much, much more. Don't have much movement in my hands. Most of my body is burned, and life in hospital is like a magnifying glass. Terrible, but like a magnifying glass, and I saw lots of things I didn't like. In particular, there were questions about bandage removal. How do you remove bandages from burn patient? There were questions about control. There were questions about medications, placebos. There were all kinds of things like that. And, when life is very, very miserable, like when life is, is generally good, you're not stopping and wondering and questioning and so on. When life is very miserable and every little thing can make an improvement, it becomes a survival mechanism. And I started thinking about what are the things that I could do to make my life better? What are the things that the medical staff is doing unintentionally and not getting me to suffer too much, have too much pain, and so on. I discovered many of those. But this for me was the initial lab that I was at. And when I left the hospital and I started studying and then kept on going, there is something in our brain called mirror neurons. Mm-hmm. And the idea of mirror neurons is, if I watch you walk around and bang your head on something, I feel your pain a little bit. How do I feel your pain? Do I really feel your pain? Also like brain waves? No. What happens is we have mirror neurons that when we experience something, we experience the pain. But when I see you experience something, the mirror neurons basically imitate a small version of how you would feel when you have this pain. So mirror neurons are really a part of our empathy mechanism, mm-hmm. right? I have a little mechanism that when you're suffering, it plays a little bit of that in my head. And I think that because I had so many years in hospital, almost 3 years, and so many years of treatment and surgery, and my last surgery was just a few years ago, I still have pain today. I think I have a lot of mirror neurons for pain. And I think I'm very attuned to other people's pain as well. So after leaving the hospital, the questions about human misery and how we can try and elevate and improve it have been very, very dear to me. So most of what I do is that. Most of what I do is I look at the world around. I see all kinds of things I don't like. I feel people's pain, and then I think, with what can I do with my tools, which is social science, to understand the problem and see if I can propose some solution. That's basically what I do.
So it's like the in a way like the curse that became a little bit of a gift or like a superpower.
Yeah. Certainly, I think it's a. Certainly, I don't recommend traumatic, difficult injuries. No. But if somebody has that, it's overall terrible, but there's some benefits as well. And the benefit of understanding people's misery at the higher level is a benefit.
Yeah. I guess like there are the things that we can control and the things that we cannot control. So then probably when you saw yourself in that situation, you were like, okay, at least is there something positive that I can at least kind of angle it and do about it?
And it didn't necessarily came at the moment, but over time, certainly.
Yeah. I remember I did a course in emotional intelligence, and this is like some years ago. But there, I think I've learned about the mirror neuron. Whereas, like if you are a leader and you come and you try to talk to your people, if you're stressed or if you're angry, you can. It doesn't matter the type of words that you use; people would actually feel what you're feeling. So I thought that's very, very interesting.
It also says something about the value of sharing. Right? If you basically say, if I want you to understand me, playing out, sharing how I feel is an important part of that.
And if we go into, let's say, one of the experiments or situations that you have described that I really, really liked, I think, so they're kind of both connected. One, it was like the apartment picking, where you kind of have to pick an apartment. And I guess this happens to a lot of people, where they kind of go and talk with real estaters and they try to pick an apartment, and the real estate, they kind of show two comparables. One has like a little bit of a downside, but then also the other one that I thought that it was just fascinating, like the face match. I don't know how to best kind of describe it, or like two men or two females, and then you took the picture of one of the males or one of the females and you slightly kind of changed it a little bit. Would you want to walk us through what happened there? And then if we would have to transfer it a little bit like to the entrepreneurs, then listening, like how should they think about pricing and to have like the effective decoy introduce a decoy there?
So the first thing I would say is that the big lessons from all of these experiments on choice and pricing and so on is that we think that we control our decisions, but there are other forces that shape our decision as well. Right? We think that we're driving, we're deciding. That's one. We also think that our decisions are well reasoned and thought and so on, but often we choose first and we explain afterward. So the reasoning, as much as it feels like it's in the real moment, it's often not what's driving the decision. It comes afterward. So the two examples you gave are kind of good examples to think about this. And they also say one third thing, which is that we don't really know what we want. And because of that, the environment can shape us. Now, if we had very, very strict preference, saying, oh, I love this coffee, it's $1.25, but if it was $1.26, I would not buy it. Then, of course, these things would not work. But because we don't really know what we like so much, we're very much influenced by the environment. So let's think about these two examples. And the second thing you started with is the idea of a decoy. And the idea of a decoy is the following. Imagine you have two options. It could be two people to date, but it could be two products. You have one option that is good on some features and another option that is good on other features. This option is good on this dimension. This option is good on this dimension. Maybe if it's we're considering two potential mates. One has a more attractive, let's just stay superficial. One has a nicer looking face, and one has a nicer looking body. So we have somebody with a nice face and a not so good body, somebody with a great body and not so good face, and we have to choose. And we don't know. Now, we can change this, but let's say we find a situation where when these things are pitted against themselves, people are 50-50. Now, what if we took somebody with a really nice face and not so good body, and we made somebody similar to them, but slightly worse? that person is very attractive in their face and not so attractive in their bodies. What if we made somebody also not that attractive in their body, but less attractive from the face perspective? So they look similar, but less attractive. Or we take somebody who has an as unattractive face as the second person, but their body is even less attractive. So we have the two options, and we have these other things that are slightly similar but slightly less appealing. What happens when we introduce things? When we have A and B, and we add A minus. Now, A minus is clearly worse. Nobody picks A minus. And clearly worse. Why would you pick A minus? But what A minus does is to make it clear what is the decisive advantage of A over A minus. Or if we have B minus makes it clear, oh, look, this person has a much more beautiful body than this one. This person has a much more beautiful face than this one. And it actually gets, you introduce A minus, A gets picked more. You introduce B minus, B picks more. And again, you can think about this conclusion in a very concrete way. You can say, when you introduce new products to the market and you want to direct people into either A or B, you can create decoy effects. You can create effects that would make the attribute of A be more important or the attribute of B more important by introducing new products that people would compare and consider. That's one issue. The second issue, more general, is to say, all of this means that we don't really know how to trade off A and B. We don't really know what we want, and we are influenced by the context. And now this has much bigger implications for entrepreneurs. So imagine that you are competing in the market, and the market is very established. Imagine that you're doing a new type of AI, a new type of LLM, and there are already a few players in the market. You need to understand that people make relative comparison. You can't. The market is not fresh anymore. There are other competitors in the market, and you're going to be perceived compared to them. And you better understand it and figure out where you want to stand compared to them, because you might seem better, you might seem worse, but comparison is going to happen. But what if you're creating a new market? If you're creating a new market and you say, oh, people don't really know what they want, you have much more freedom and flexibility, and you could do many, many more things. So that's kind of one specific interpretation of how do we think about our options, and then in the new market or in a mature market, and so on. The first example you gave was the example of the housing, and there's a couple of them. So I'll give one and tell me if this is the one that you had in mind. And this has to do with anchoring. And the example is that you move from an expensive town to a cheap town, or you move from a very cheap town to a cheap town. You end up in a cheap town, but you either came from an expensive town or you came from a cheap town. You either used to expensive housing markets or you used to very cheap housing market. And what happened is that people end up being influenced by the market of the place they left. Housing market is very important. You move into a new city, in a week, you see the houses, you understand it's important and so on, but still we are influenced by past prices. And again, not just about this example, it's about the fact that our past decisions stay with us for longer than they should. Right? So if you started spending $30,000 on a car, when you come to buy your next car, odds are that you're going to be influenced by your previous car. Right? It's just that's the idea. We make decisions, and when we come to make new decisions, our past decisions stay with us as an anchor, and they influence our later decisions. This means, for example, that if you start a new product and you're basically training people to pay zero, and you hope that, oh my goodness, I'll get people to buy zero, to spend zero. They will come in growth. They'll sign up. They'll use my product. They'll realize how wonderful it is, and then they'll be willing to pay $50 a month. There are a lot of things that are working against you. In particular, once people have decided that they're going to pay zero, very hard to move them to pay something, right? So once you understand it, you need to think about, okay, so what do I do? Now, there are ways to overcome it. Because you might say, look, I want to give people a free trial. So some things to do is to basically give people a short trial. Right? Do they really need a 3-month trial at zero? Or another thing to say is to say, look, this software costs $50,000 a month, $50 a month. But because I respect your time, if you answer me a few questions, I'll waive the fee for the first month. I still establish that this is costly, but we're doing it in a different way. So both of these effects, right, the relativity and the decoy and the anchoring, say people don't really know what we want. We use different algorithms to figure out what we value. But they also give some specific ideas of, we compare things in relative ways, and relativity, we interpret relativity in a way that helps us solve problems and make choices. And we are prisoners of our past choices. And if you get somebody to make a certain choice at a certain time, odds are that they'll be influenced by these choices moving forward. And all of these things are very useful to know up front and figure out how you want to either strategize based on that or influence these framings.
It's very fascinating, in particular, like the context, how we make decisions based on context, and how, even though, let's say, as an entrepreneur, you enter a new market, it's not necessarily advantageous for you that it's a new market, because still you have to bring it into context, ideally, because then people will make decisions as long as you compare whatever you're doing with something that is in their consciousness comparable. And ideally, if I understand your point, then you need your product to be the A plus and the other product to be the A minus, but at least you kind of gave them the context to make the decision.
Or you can make the A plus and the A minus. Like you can decide to influence things this way. But yes, relativity is very important. So imagine that you come up with a new product and you ask yourself, what are people going to compare this? Right? What is it going to be compared in people's minds? Is it, when the first tablet was introduced, was it a small laptop or was it a big phone? Yeah. Those are different things, right? So this, it matters, right? Imagine that we came up with a new food. It's a vegan steak.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a vegetable substitute or is it a meat substitute? Right? These are different prices. We come with a new alcoholic beverage. Is it a beer substitute or a wine substitute or a gin and tonic substitute? Very different prices. If people compare it to beer, the price will be very different. If people compare it to gin and tonic, it will be very different. So, there's lots to say about pricing, but yes, we need to think about what position we occupy. Let me say differently. Sometimes when I give lectures, I start with visual illusions.
Mm-hmm. I love that, yeah.
And visual illusions do a few things. First of all, they show us that we all are biased in the same way, right? It's not as if half the people say, I see this, and no. Everybody have the same visual. Some there are individual differences, but mostly there are not. So I say, okay, let's agree we all process information in a biased way. Visual illusion tell us that what's in our mind is not what's out there. There are differences. And then the second thing I try to convince people is that what we should care about is what is in people's minds and not what's out there. At the end of the day, I don't know what's out there. All I have access to is what is in my mind. So if I have a product that I love or give me a warm and fuzzy feeling, but it's not that in reality, my feelings really matter. Perception really matters. And what we should try to understand is how is our product perceived and not just what it is. If I could talk to entrepreneurs, here is what I would say. The human mind is like a vintage Swiss Army. What do I mean by that? I mean two concepts, vintage and Swiss Army knife. Let's start with the Swiss Army knife. The Swiss Army knife idea is that the Swiss Army knife is not particularly good at anything. It's not anything that you would say that you say, oh, I need to open a can. Where's my Swiss Army knife? I need a knife. I need a screwdriver. No. The Swiss Army knife is not particularly good at anything, but it's quite good in lots of things. And our mind as a decision-making tool is kind of like that. Not particularly excellent in anything, but does a lot of things and we can carry it with us. So that's the Swiss Army knife. The vintage part is that our Swiss Army knife was designed a long time ago for a very different environment. This was an environment with tigers and lions. It was not an environment with cryptocurrency and health insurance and 30 years of retirement. So what we have is we still carry with us this vintage Swiss Army knife. Only now we face tasks that we don't have tools for. We don't have a tool for compound interest. We have tools for living in small groups. We don't have tools for living in a large anonymous society. We don't have tools to divide our attention between texting and driving, or using our phone while driving. So I think that when we come to design the world, and what entrepreneurs do is basically design the world. We can design the physical world, chairs, table, refrigerator, cars. We can design the cognitive world, electronic banking and education systems and ways to improve our health. When we come to design the world, I think we need to figure out what is it that people are naturally good at. And if we ask people something that they're not naturally good at, say, it's just not going to work, let's figure it out. Now, of course, there are some people who try to take advantage of people, right? There's some cases in which you say, oh, I want to understand where people fail because I want to abuse it. Let's put that aside and let's hope not many people would do that. But when you try to help people make better decisions, it is crucial to understand what are the natural tools that people have. And if it's incompatible with the world, let's make the world such that it is compatible with these tools. And I'll give you an example. Think about cars. Cars get better every year. How do cars get better every year? They get better by having a deeper understanding of where people fail in driving. All these people can't drive. Let's give them a rear view mirror. Let's give them a seatbelt, side mirrors, all kinds of things like that. So the engineers of cars say, we're not happy with these humans. Let's make the cars compensate for what these humans are not able to do. If people are too lazy to look over their shoulder, let's do something about it. On the other hand, we have things like information technology, where you say social media networks also try to understand where we fail every year, and they get better every year, but they get better by trying to abuse us more. Let's understand people's weak points, gossip, being vindictive. They love pictures. They love things that look like conspiracies, and let's do more of that. And
Provocative.
yeah, so I think that my version is we need to understand what people are good at, and when we come to design the world, we need to make it compatible with that. And I think, for me, if you ask me what is the big lesson from social science, we can talk about pricing, we can talk about all kinds of specific things. But if you ask me what is the big message is people are a product of an evolutionary environment that is very different from the one we have. But the tools that we have are not compatible. So the technology needs to be compatible. Now, one challenge is that every entrepreneur, of course, is an expert in their field. So to them, lots of things look natural. Think about cryptocurrency. You talk to people who've been, for 20 years in the crypto space, or for 10 years, everything looks trivial to them. Oh, obviously, no, not so obvious to most people. You need to figure out how the tools can be compatible with our natural tools.
I really like the example that you gave with the visuals, because then you kind of see how your brain interprets reality and it can fool you. And you kind of gave this example like with the circles, whereas like if you put a circle next to smaller circles, the circle is bigger. If you put a circle,
let's just remind people, imagine two circles of the same size. One of them is surrounded by a small circle. One of them is surrounded by long circles. And you say, which small circle is larger? And the ones surrounded by small circles look larger. Why? Because the brain works on relativity. We said already that the brain works on relativity when we talked about the decoy effect. It's true in a lot of things. Relativity is a general algorithm of the brain. So if you see a circle next to big ones, it looks small in comparison. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's not as if you can say, now I see that it's this, I'm fixed, so no one else see them in the same way. No, relativity just works on us. It's very hard to fight it. Now, you can say, let me do like this and cover the rest, measure. You can override it with some technologies, but if we use our natural tendencies, we will get it wrong every time.
And when it comes with trying to stay rational when making decisions, you said, and I liked it how you said it, we're prisoners of our past choices. Does that mean that we should have different type of, let's say, decisions that we should reassess the rationality of it, not to fall into the anchoring of the past?
Absolutely. So let's make this more general. Most people will make tomorrow very similar decisions to the ones they made today. And reassessing everything we do is just lots of hard work. So we don't do it. And therefore we keep on falling into all kinds of patterns that are not ideal for us. This is why a midlife crisis is so useful. You look like you're too young for a midlife crisis, but one day when you get to it, give me a call. I think midlife crises are wonderful. They're wonderful. Why? Because they're an opportunity to re-examine where we are. Do we want to wake up every day and examine where we are? No. But once every 10 years, it's actually a good thing to do. How did I get here? Is this really where I wanted to get? Or is it just the force of habit, repetition, what is easy? And it's not easy. We don't want people to do it all the time, but once in a while, it's a very, very useful thing. And then you can break away from these patterns, but you need to first assess where you are and figure out, did I really want to be here? So I'll give you one way of doing that. So I'll give you a romantic example, but you can do it for lots of things. So one of my friends came to me a long time ago, and he told me that he's fighting with his wife all the time. I saw them fighting all the time. It was very unpleasant for everybody. And he asked me if I think they should stay married or whether he should ask for a divorce. And I told him, before I answer this question, you're asking the question in the wrong way. Because when you say, should we stay married or should we get divorced, you're making the staying married option easier than the other one. Say, maybe it's the right choice, but you're giving it an unfair advantage. So I said, let's stimulate another scenario. Let's assume that you've never met her until last night. And last night you met her, and in one night you learned everything you know about her from the last 10 years. So there's no history, but you know everything. And now it's not a question of do I want to stay married or get divorced, is do you want to propose to her or do you want to say I never want to see you again? Now, if you think about the framing of do I want to stay married or ask for divorce, gives the stay married the benefit of staying. You're not changing anything. When you think about the other option, you're saying it's A and B. They're on equal footings. Right. Needless to say, they got divorced. They're both happier with other people. And it's also a dangerous exercise to do at home. If you're going to think about your life this way, be cautious. It's a risky move, but it's the right move because you say, how can I, at least as a thought exercise, think to myself, how would I behave if there was no option to continue? Right? And you would say, would I choose this career? Would I choose this city? When you get to a midlife crisis, that's what you do. You say, oh, I got here. Wait. Let me see. Partner, job, city, hobbies, friends. I got here somehow, but if I stopped and say, would I do this? Would I do this again? And if you say yes, it will be very, very wonderful to know. And if you say no, then you have to think about what you want to change. But this, even though it's a thought experiment, right? You can't. This guy couldn't be unmarried to her. This thought experiment of what if I. But it's a good way to think to yourself. And let me give you one more version of this in a startup. So imagine you have a startup and you raise some money and you've been going for a year. And now all of a sudden you have a very different idea. Your current partner for this startup is not the right partner for the new idea, but things change so much these days, especially something changed in technology, all of a sudden you have a different idea. If you say to yourself, should I continue with my startup or should I switch? That's one framing. That's the real framing of the world. But what you could do for yourself is to say, if I started today, knowing everything I know about the idea I've been working on for a year, I don't want to assume I'm on day one. I already have a year into it. I know all kinds of things and so on. And I had this idea. If I would choose from scratch today, what would I choose? Now,
would I choose the same partner? Would I choose the same idea? Yeah.
Now, you might say, no, I wouldn't, but I raised money, I owe people. That's fine. It's fine. The constraints exist. I'm not saying that always, if you say I would do the new thing, always do that. No. There's cost to make that decision. But at least to yourself, it's an exercise that can kind of clean the plate a little bit and say, am I doing this because I think it's the better idea? Or am I doing this because I've done this before?
I like that. I like that you need to put a lot of attention into the framing and make sure that you don't have an option that is the easy one. that you can just go with the momentum because, I can just continue. I don't have to put any type of effort instead of kind of pivoting. I guess this is something that entrepreneurs face quite often. Do we need to pivot or not, or should we continue? I mean, continuing what you've done so far is probably the easy.
And if you say we're prisoners of our past choices, then you basically say, I understand this, but let me make sure that I understand the level to which I'm a prisoner of my past choices. That, look, if you just got married and you have 2 kids, wait for a while. if you just had a hard time raising money and wait, I mean, I'm not saying the moment that you have an inkling, but it's good to understand, saying, okay, here is, I would have done something else. Now let me figure out how to do it. So I think it's very important to understand that inertia is incredibly important, incredibly impactful, and to make sure it's not overriding lots of other things.
And you mentioned perception, that most of the things are perception, and how people see it.
What I mean is that what we should care about is perception. So
we should.
I'll give you an example. I went to visit a big bank in a country I will not mention. And they told me that they're going to make all the ATMs free moving forward. Up to that point, they cost a little bit and they're going to make it free. And they thought it will be wonderful. Free, people will be excited and so on. And I told them it will be terrible. I said, people would hate you. He said, how can people hate us? We're going to do this for free. I said, you'll see. People would say, why did you bastard charge me for the last 10 years? He said, you could say, thank you for charging me $0. Why did you charge me for the last 10 years? And I proposed a way out of it. What I propose is that they should change the ATMs so that when people put the card in, they would say, usually this ATM cost X. Our cost of the bank to operate this network and so on is X per transaction. But we understand that not everybody has the money and not all the time. So if you want, you can pay less and you decide how much to pay. And I told them that the least you would get is $0, but I'm willing to bet that you would get some money. Not everybody would give you $0. Plus, you would not tell them that I can do this for free. Mm-hmm. But anyway, what I proposed was too much work. They didn't do it. They went with $0. People hated them, exactly as I said. The fact was that they started doing something for a very, very nice reason. But what they didn't understand is what was going to be in people's minds. Eventually, we are doing things in the world to influence people's minds. Our minds don't translate reality in a straightforward way. We have all kinds of quirks in how we do that. And that's something that everybody needs to understand.
So the last question, people will continue to be predictably irrational, exemplified also by your own Stanford versus MIT decision-making process on 2 very similar options. How can people be better at least being aware of their irrationality? Are there any resources, podcasts, books? Of course, we covered only 2 or 3 experiments, so I highly recommend them to read your books.
Thank you. So there are many irrationalities. I should point out that some of these irrationalities are wonderful. For example, we fall in love. We write poetry. People open new restaurants. Very, very irrational. Entrepreneurs give tremendous value to society at tremendous risk to themselves. So not all irrationalities are bad, but it is important to understand all of those. And there are many of them. It's not as if there are one. But I'll give you one general approach that helps a little bit. And this is the approach of what is called taking the outside perspective. When we are in something, we are consumed by it. We are influenced by emotion. We're sensitive. All kinds of things happen. when we advise people, we are more distant. We see it in a more clear, objective way. So the recommendation is that when you face a decision, ask yourself what you would advise somebody else in your situation. And then, of course, take that advice. But this observer advisor perspective or participant advisor perspective really helps often clean some of the challenges.
Love it. The outside perspective. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time. I recommend everyone to read your books, and success with everything that you are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Lovely to spend some time with you.